In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Christ is risen. So I should say before I begin, I am not some paragon of hospitality. I am an ordinary, backsliding, self-centered sinner who likes his comforts and a quiet life. I've been known to roll my eyes and groan when my phone rings. The reason for this, I'm ashamed to admit, is that I am worried that it might be someone who wants something from me. My time, my attention, my kindness, my support, my money. Now that may be a good time to leave if you're expecting somebody more saintly. So I'll just pause a few minutes while you file out. With all that said, in my long career working with people who need support, young and old, I've picked up a few insights along the way, which you may find interesting and helpful. And particularly in these last 5 or more years working for the Alzheimer's Society, who are for those of you who don't know, are a leading UK dementia charity. So very little about me. After years of trying from the age of 16 and with only very occasional and sporadic success to make a living playing rock music, about 25 years ago in my 30s, I decided I should finally try and do something about getting a proper job. And I managed to get a part-time position as a learning support assistant in a busy Essex secondary school, trying to herd large gangs of feral Year 10 boys. This led to a very interesting and varied career over the subsequent years in youth work. I've worked in drug treatment services, in social work, and latterly in special education, post-16 special education, and now, as I say, a few years now, 5 years or more, working with the Alzheimer's Society. And I started doing that, yes, in 2019. And I've been there ever since. My role is, I'm a dementia advisor. I carry out community dementia assessments. I visit people at home, find out about their situation. I refer them to social care, to occupational therapy services. We try and find social activities and clubs for people who are isolated. And I try to offer a listening ear and sometimes maintain relationships with my service users for many months. I've got some people I've been working with now for most of those 5 years, on and off. So the point of that is to try to help them with the different stages of their diagnosis and maybe also in their caring role, because I don't only support people with a diagnosis of dementia, but also their families and people who love them and live with them and trying to look after them. At some point during all of this long and meandering journey, my wife, Presbytera Paula, is the back there, and we discovered and were received into the Orthodox Church, and now I'm a priest, and she's a Presbytera, or a Curia, as we Antiochians like to say. Like many Orthodox priests, I've needed to continue my secular employment, part-time in my case, to help continue to put food on the table. And God has blessed and challenged me with this work, which both now informs and is in turn informed by my priesthood. So where to start? Well, one thing that working with people who live with dementia has made me think about a great deal is a question which perhaps precedes any discussion of hospitality. And this is a question which is probably only a question because of the historically strange times in which we live. Nonetheless, I believe it is a question we do need to pause briefly and ask ourselves, and it is this: to whom are we extending hospitality? To whom are we extending hospitality? And I'm, of course, talking about personhood. So in our culture of modernity, we have a tendency to link personhood to agency. That is, the ability to act autonomously. Increasingly, our materialist consumer culture has led us to define our personhood with reference to our preferences, our interests, our activities, our productivity, our opinions, our hopes and dreams, our capacity for self-expression and self-identity. But this is a culture of individuals and not one of persons. We ask, who or what are we, when we can no longer buy with one click express our views and opinions, live life to the full in that horrible expression so beloved of advertisers, or even feed and wash ourselves. The tragic fact is that our modern technological societies are increasingly unsure how to answer this question, and the dark tide of euthanasia sweeping the West under the grisly euphemism of assisted dying speaks to the total loss of our ability to consider personhood beyond the definitions of commodity and utility. In the words of the orthodox psychologist Peter Kavanagh, we've gone further than René Descartes' famous axiom, "I think, therefore I am," to say instead, "I achieve, therefore I am." And in this bleak, utilitarian and nihilistic worldview, life has no meaning outside of its outward expression, our distractions and activities, the extent to which we are able to exercise mastery over the world, and the idea of suffering even less. But as Orthodox Christians, this should emphatically not be how we define personhood. The fathers of the Church understood personhood to be completed or fulfilled, if you like, by relationship, or better yet, by or in communion. We are truly persons when we are in communion with each other and with God. Further, they understood the human person not in the superficial, mechanistic and materialist way our modern culture does, as mere meat puppets with brain chemistry somehow creating the illusion of some sort of self-awareness or consciousness, but as a mysterious and wondrous unity of soul and body, perceiving with minds and senses that reach out and touch creation and communicating in turn with what and who we find. If we try to hold this view of personhood in our minds and hearts, we'll begin to think about everyone around us differently, especially those who perhaps do not fit the narrow mechanical definitions of personhood so culturally prevalent today. And so, having explored that question at least a little, for it is a big subject, we could easily be here for days on end. What of hospitality? Well, this love of strangers, this Philoxenia, is like all real love, personal. Like all true love, it can never be offered or received in general, but only in particular and between actual, realised persons. We are not made hospitable by requiring others to be so, nor are we made so by our political or lofty philosophical or ethical principles, but by our willingness to literally offer ourselves in person to other particular persons. I'm often reminded of this quote from Dostoevsky, the brothers Karamazov, and no, I've never managed to get all the way through, I'm not ashamed to admit. It's of the lady talking with the starets, Zosimas. She says, "The more I love humanity in general, the less I love man in particular. In my dreams, I often make plans for the service of humanity, and perhaps I might actually face crucifixion if it were suddenly necessary. Yet I'm incapable of living in the same room with anyone for more than 2 days together." I love that quote, which manages to be simultaneously funny and yet horribly close to home. But you get the point. So I want to give a few examples of how I think we can practice hospitality in our day-to-day lives. Not so much in terms of maybe cooking large quantities of soup and inviting your less fortunate neighbours round to eat, although that kind of thing is surely very important, but in how we can offer ourselves to others in our ordinary daily lives, in those moment-to-moment interactions with others, in ways that honour the personhood of the other. And I want to frame this by my experience of meeting and talking with people living with dementia, their family members and carers. So a little about dementia. Alzheimer's disease and all other forms of dementia damage the physical body, the brain, the nervous system. These are incurable, progressive and terminal conditions which rob people of their speech, their ability to understand the world around them, their memory, their mobility, their ability to communicate, and even ultimately the most basic human functions. Distressing behaviour changes and personality changes are common features, as are sometimes hallucination and crippling anxiety. It is terrifying to us, particularly in our modern world, where we see suffering almost as an affront, and in which the value of human life is considered pretty much completely in terms of autonomy, utility and commodity. Who are we if we cannot express our opinion? Who are we if we forget who everyone is, or even our own names? Who are we if we are completely dependent on others for our most basic needs? Who are we if we are not living our best life? But as we have seen, as Orthodox Christians, we know that we are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and that this image bearer is a mystical unity of the spiritual and the material. And even though the physical component, the body, may be damaged, the soul is not. The fathers of the church, like St. Gregory of Nyssa, understood that the soul gives the body life, as well as the ability to interact with the material world. And therefore this dynamic, entangled relationship we have within ourselves reaches outwards for communion also. Communion is what we are created for. It may help to think of the body, which obviously includes the brain, as a musical instrument, which the soul is, if you like, trying to play. And just as when a guitar or piano is damaged or missing strings, it is not then the fault of the musician when the music becomes tuneless or dissonant. This need of the soul for communion is not impaired by dementia, and we see this in countless ways when we spend time with people who have and live with dementia. People are not their problems. People are not their problems. Vera and Bob attend a monthly memory cafe run by a local charity in Colchester. Well into their 80s, I've changed their names by the way, well into their 80s they've been married for 60 years, were born and bred in Colchester and are clearly devoted to one another. Vera has Alzheimer's disease and Bob does his best to look after her at home with very little outside help. She cannot speak very much but listens attentively to people when they are talking. She becomes anxious if she cannot see Bob and needs a lot of reassurance. I've gotten to know them a little bit during my regular visits to the cafe over about a year. I attend the Memory Cafe in my capacity as a dementia advisor to give information, advice and support on issues relating to dementia and care. And this leads me to my first observation that people are not their problems. The lady running the cafe has come tiptoeing over to me when I arrived and whispered, "Can you speak to Bob, please? He's really struggling with Vera." Now, it would have been easy to approach Vera and Bob with a sort of professional detachment, at this point brandishing a stack of leaflets or an assessment form, and perhaps squirreling Bob aside for an earnest talk about carers' assessments, stress management, occupational therapy referrals, while somebody keeps Vera busy. But Vera and Bob are not a collection of public health outcomes which need to be improved, nor do they represent a pile of unclaimed entitlements waiting to be applied for. But don't get me wrong, these things may indeed and often do need to be addressed. But first and foremost, they are persons, image bearers, fearfully and wonderfully made. So I sit with them both and we talk. Another elderly local couple, friends of theirs, soon join us with a plate of biscuits. The conversation ranges far and wide. Wonderful stories of the villages around the town in the 40s and 50s. The time an escaped bull ran down the high street and crashed into a tobacconist's shop window. How the local kids staged plays on the back step of a medieval church in the old Dutch quarter. Vera's eyes are shining with tears. She grips Bob's wrist and little smiles come and go across her mobile face. Bob turns occasionally to reassure her, patting her hand. Bob cracks a joke and we all, including Vera, laugh heartily. We spend an hour and a half doing this. When it's time to leave, we all get up and get ready to go, and Vera walks over to me, beaming with happiness, and grips my arm quite hard and says, "Thank you." And Bob says, "Thanks, mate, she needed that." I check that Bob knows how to contact the Alzheimer's Society if he wants some extra support, and to tell him to call me. I recount this tale not to make any great claims of my work or for my work or expertise. I have none to speak of, but to show that the most magical qualities of simple human communal activities, sitting in a circle, telling stories, laughing, connecting face to face, soul to soul. The social care assessments will be done and the attendance allowance applied for, all in good time. But first, Vera needs an hour to eat a couple of custard creams and to smile and laugh, remembering perhaps in fragments her childhood. So perhaps another insight to be drawn from this kind of situation is the great benefit of hearing the story of a person's life. Not simply information about them, their data, diagnosis, date of birth, medication, referral to external agencies, blah, blah, blah. Although that kind of information obviously has its place. The thing is, we tend to underestimate the importance of so-called small talk. People's problems seem so huge and overwhelming that it is a temptation to switch gears immediately into heavy, diagnostic or even forensic problem-solving language. But again, we run the risk of forgetting to see the person at the heart of the problems, the chaos, the anguish, the sadness, the shame. I've noticed time and time again the effect on an older person living with dementia of being asked this simple question: what does it used to do for a living? I remember sitting with an elderly couple on a home visit last year. The husband, Dave, we'll call him, had been living with Alzheimer's disease for a couple of years, but could still manage a conversation. I made a point of starting every home visit with some light chit-chat if it seems appropriate. I noticed many watercolours of steam engines on the walls, and I chanced a question: who's the train buff then? There followed a fascinating hour. David worked on the railways in the late 1950s through to the 80s before retiring. He virtually lit up before my eyes, talking animatedly, repeating himself often, about his years in the industry. His wife Maureen chimed in with little stories about their courting days, their first car, how her mum loved Dave. Eventually the conversation shifted to the issues they were both facing in the here and now as they became less able to care for each other and for themselves. But, and this is crucial, the conversation about their problems now had some context. They'd been invited into the inevitable community dementia assessment as real persons with histories, stories, lives, dreams, hopes. Our culture has a pathological hatred of suffering and pain, and as such we are all influenced by this imperative of wanting to make it go away, to fix it, to put a positive spin on it. We want to start giving advice and sorting things out. But if this is what we are primarily interested in, and we're not really listening or interested in encountering real persons, we don't take time to acknowledge and honour the people we are trying to help and everything they bring, then really, I dare to say that we may be only trying to help ourselves, to perhaps unconsciously do something to avoid the discomfort, the bleakness, or the chilly presence of our own mortality. So one of my favourite sayings in my years now, 25 or so years of working with people who are struggling with problems is, don't just do something, stand there. Right? You can see, usually say it the other way around. So I spent a good amount of time over the years sitting with people who have lost hope. They're filled with despair and cannot see anything good in the future or the present. These days it is often with carers, that rather cold clinical term that local and health authorities use to categorise real people. Husbands and wives with decades of marriage behind them, or brothers and sisters, even close friends, desperately trying to love someone with whom they have rarely exchanged a crossword, who now screams at them for no reason, or who never makes it to the toilet on time, or who is adamant that there are strangers hiding in the house when there are clearly none, no matter how many times they are reassured. Often the person they are trying to love seems no longer to be the person they spent all those years with at all. And they are often sad, angry, bitter, frustrated, disorientated and disillusioned. Over the years I've also spent time with people despairing of ever conquering terrible addictions or severe and tormenting mental health issues and disabilities. The responses are often the same. There are all kinds of unhelpful platitudes which can be offered here about cultivating a positive mindset, counting our blessings, finding some respite in healthy activities. The ghastly phrase, well-being, may even be uttered. But the fact is that the real crisis in all of the muck and bullets is one of meaning. What does any of it mean? Why is it happening? It seems pointless, cruel, a sick joke, certainly to them, and if we are honest, sometimes even to us, though we be Christians, or Lord have mercy, even priests. Of course, all there really is love. We were not created to be happy, but to love and be in communion. And this is just as true in our broken world, corrupted by sin and death, as it was in Eden before that fateful rebellion, perhaps even more so. And so that is what we must do, as excruciating as it is. However pitiful our offering, however much we want to leave the suffering person and get in our car and drive and drive and drive. Sometimes there might be something to say, but often there is not. Often we must sit quietly and inwardly try to say a prayer for the bewildered, exhausted, betrayed image bearer sitting before us in the front room of the house that she and her Alzheimer's-stricken husband bought happily with such excitement and optimism for £12,000 in 1975. We must try to stay for as long as we can, according to our strength, to lean a bit into our discomfort, to come to this suburban Golgotha, helping to carry their cross even a short distance. This is often, certainly in my own case, for my late father had Alzheimer's disease, a rather pathetic and grudging little sacrifice, but make it we must. The former Marxist and gay activist turned Christian, Rosaria Butterfield, has described hospitality as the ground zero of the Christian faith. And I'm inclined to agree. There is certainly nothing in that statement for the Orthodox to take issue with. But it may be all the more crucial to remember this in our hyper-individualistic, commodified Western culture. Turning our attention to others rather than obsessing over whether or not our own desires are fulfilled, our career, or dare I say our religious obligations are scrupulously met, seems a profoundly countercultural proposition today. It may be that we are temperamentally the kind of people to cook wonderful meals for housefuls of guests. As I said above, this is a beautiful and necessary service to others. But for many of us, the most common opportunity to offer hospitality will come in those sometimes brief or difficult encounters with the people that God has given us to love, to learn to see and treat as true persons, the sick, the suffering, the sorrowful and afflicted, all captives and the needy poor. And the Greek word Philoxenia occurs, at least according to the ever-reliable Strong's Greek, twice in the New Testament, once in Romans and once in Hebrews. I'm happy to be corrected on that, by the way. In Romans, Paul writes, distributing to the necessity of saints, given to hospitality. And St. John Chrysostom says of this passage, St. Paul does not say bestow upon, but share with the necessity of the saints, to show that they receive more than they give. That it is a matter of merchandise, because it is a community. Do you bring in money? They bring you in boldness toward God. He does not say doing it, but given to it. So to instruct us not to wait for those who shall ask it and see when they will come to us, but to run to them and be given to finding them. That's John Chrysostom. And in Hebrews, let brotherly love continue. Be not forgetful of hospitality, for hereby some have entertained angels unawares. And again, St. John Chrysostom says, see how he, St. Paul, again enjoins them to preserve what they had. He does not add other things. He did not say, be loving as brethren, but let brotherly love continue. And again, he did not say, be hospitable as if they were not, but be not forgetful of hospitality, for this was likely to happen owing to their afflictions. Therefore he says, some have entertained angels unawares. Do you see how great was the honour, how great the gain? What is unawares? They entertained them without knowing it. Therefore the reward also was great, because he entertained them not knowing that they were angels. For if he had known it, it would have been nothing wonderful. Brothers and sisters, forgive me, the unworthy priest, but this is what we were created to accomplish. If we really think about it, people living with dementia are the ultimate strangers. They may seem even to exist in a totally different reality from us at times, inhabiting the fringes and margins of our familiar world. So we must learn to really see, to really hear, and to sit quietly, often saying very little in 1,000 personal Gethsemanes and Golgothas, bearing one another's burdens, to see Christ in everyone, giving away the treasure of our personal wants and desires, even if only for a few minutes here and there. It is from such small beginnings that saints are made. Forgive me.
Thank you very much, Father Mark. We do have some time for some questions. So is anyone brave enough to be the first person to ask?
Yeah. Hello there. My name's John. My grandfather is currently in hospital. He has a rather advanced case of jaundice due to an obstruction on his bile duct by a tumour on his pancreas. Now, today he's gone under the knife to see if they can install a stent. They attempted it on Monday and to no success, so this is a second attempt by another means. He's not a Christian. In fact, in the past he's sometimes been a bit snarky and cynical about religion. But I still love him, and in fact, the last couple of weeks, his heart seems to have softened somewhat. I love him, and I've known him my whole life, naturally. It's very dear to me. Both my grandparents are aware that he either has weeks to live or, at best, probably months. With your experience, do you have any suggestions for us as Christians who have dying friends and family? How should we serve them and help them on their way out? Especially, this is a challenge for me. I'm not sure whether I should try to explain Christ to him, whether that's imposing. But I wish he knew the hope of the resurrection.
Sure.
Thank you, Carl.
Well, thank you, John. Well, first of all, what was your grandfather's name?
Gary.
Gary, okay. Well, I pray for Gary.
Thank you.
May you have mercy, life, peace, health, salvation and visitation, pardon and remission of sins. You may ever more praise and glorify your holy name. We should pray for our loved ones, our dear ones. First and foremost, praying for them, I think, is, again, I think it speaks a little to this sense we have. We feel like we should do something, something that manifests in the world in some way. Press some button, fill in some form, refer to some service. But of course, prayer, one of the great things one of the first things that struck me about, the Orthodox faith is the primacy of prayer. That's the first thing we should do. So pray for him, and in general, for those of us with relatives who are sick or dying, or sick and dying, who are not Christians, we should certainly pray for them, and I think be with them if you can, spend time with them and see how that goes. It might be it might be you just want to sit quietly with them. Ask Christ to give you a word. Pray with a heart full of love for your grandfather, and ask Christ to give you a word. And to St. John, to help you, and spend time, but be there. It's very important, I think. If you have as much as you can, if you have love for someone, in their last days, to try to spend time with them. And you never know that it may be that the conversation will go that way, and you'll be able to speak to them of Christ and his resurrection, his victory over death. It's a really good question, because sometimes that might not be the right thing to talk about. Sometimes we have to go and embody Christ's resurrection and victory over death, through our faith and through our prayers and through our service. And so sometimes there's definitely a time to speak, and sometimes there's a time, perhaps to be more than to speak. I hope is that helpful?
Thank you. Yes, very helpful. Thank you, Father.
Anyone else got any feedback? Yes.
And how do we move beyond being kind and hospitable among other the sense of obligation?
This is one of my favourite questions. Somebody's grumpy about giving time and stuff. Yes, carry on.
Actually, like numbing them and
Yeah.
not just doing tick the box.
Yeah, okay. So, I really believe that God can take the most, the most reprehensible motives, the worst, the laziest, most grudging person, and turn them into a saint. We've only got to look at some of our, incredible cloud of witnesses to see the lives that some of them led, and how sometimes their initial approach to repentance was perhaps a pretty feeble thing, or maybe just a moment of desperation. I think of Mary of Egypt, in standing in the porch, of the church and turning to the Mother of God. I'm sure in that second, well, she wasn't as she was later found, after all those years in the desert. At that moment, she was still who she was, but she had this, in amongst all of her sin and all of her disfigurement, this little spark of repentance. So I think, there's a great, I think it was Frederica Matthews Green, she said it either in a book she wrote or on a podcast. I heard it, I thought it was great. She said, don't wait till your teeth are fixed before you go to the dentist. Go to the dentist, get on with it. So go and be with other people, try to help them and serve them. And if you're not feeling it, then just keep going and pray that God will soften your heart. We read in Jeremiah, about take out my heart of stone. I would take out your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. That's a good prayer. So give me a heart of flesh. Give me a real heart that beats and loves others. And so God takes terrible motives and can use them. And we shouldn't wait till we feel sufficiently beatified, before we before we start trying to help people. Down that road lies spiritual delusion and no one getting helped. It's much better to help with maybe a faint heart, and then it's a bit like starting a fire. You get a bit of kindling and you have to blow, and it's rubbish for about 15 minutes. Then you get smoke in your eyes and everyone wants to go home, but eventually you get this great fire. Is that helpful? Good. Yes.
Hello. One of the things that I've struggled with the most over the years is being able to measure when to help someone because they want to receive help and they should receive help and they would be grateful for that help. Also knowing when I should help and someone might not be grateful for that, and that's okay, still do it. But also realising when someone is causing me harm, and harm that could potentially be detrimental to faith, being able to know what situation to act in and which not to. How would you say is a faithful way of measuring that?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, I think, we should always, a first thing to say is we should always have mercy for other people, so when we, so we shouldn't condemn others, and that's a good sort of starting point. I think we should try to cultivate a merciful attitude so that when people are, they're behaving in ways that are manipulative or unbounded or causing harm, clearly we need to get out of that situation. We shouldn't put ourselves in harm's way, just for the sake of it. That would be silly, but that doesn't mean we should, condemn them. So we need to work hard on being merciful in our hearts, trying to have mercy in our hearts for others. Personally, for me, I think I'm just going to make a general point, really, and then feel free, to throw rotten fruit at me or whatever. But I think my starting point would be, and this is something that comes up occasionally in my ministry, pastorally. We have a lot of new people coming to the church all the time. Some of them are pretty well integrated, and balanced people. Some of them are all over the shop, and we've got to try to meet them all and help them all and try to bring them all to Christ. One of the things I probably would look for is, and Father Thomas Hopker, blessed memory, this is one of his 55 maxims of the Orthodox faith, which I love actually. But one of those is never do anything for anybody which they can and should do for themselves. So, and I think if you can see that someone is not doing something that they perfectly can do or should do, and they're not doing it, and they're trying to get you to do it, and perhaps the way they're doing that is by manipulating you, playing mind games, all that kind of stuff. It's fine to say, you know what, no, you can do that, just do it. You know, I mean, I always think of, you know, it's not like this is a terrible plague in the West, I think, in Christianity, and certainly in kind of mainstream Christianity, if you like, for want of a better term, in the West. It's this kind of cult of niceness. You know, so we can't turn anyone away, we've got to be lovely to everybody. And, you know, and being nice has become the main activity, actually. I would say with increasingly disastrous results. You know, I can see comments appearing if this goes up on YouTube. But, you know, maybe I'll get involved. But I think we don't have to be nice to people. We don't have to like our enemies, and we don't have to be nice to our enemies. We have to love them. And sometimes, you know, loving people is not giving them everything they want all the time. That's nuts. I mean, imagine that. Imagine doing that with your kids. I mean, you're all really young, right? But some of you may have children, I'm sure. I certainly have children, and giving them absolutely everything they want is an absolute recipe for turning out a monster. So you don't do that with your children. So hopefully you have some discernment later on as you grow and become an adult, and then you meet other adults. You have some discernment to see, is this person behaving like an adult, or are they refusing to grow up and they're trying to make everyone else kind of give them what they want? So I think in that, what that person needs, and this is where, again, if we work on our own spiritual life, we you know, our prayer life, we try to grow our faith, which gives us hopefully over time some discernment in these matters. We can detect those people, and then we can give them what they need, which sometimes is just the truth. You know, and you can say to that person, you know what, really, you need to be, you know, you need to get a job, or you need to, you know, do whatever it is you need to do, but you need to do that, and this is what I'll give you, right? I won't give you 200 quid or whatever. I will give you this piece of advice. St. Paisios, there's a great little story about him. He was great because he said, like, you know, you get beggars come, they ask you for money, and sometimes you think, oh, I don't know if it'd be good to give them money, you know. So he said, you don't have to give them money, but you should give them something. And we forget that, you know, money's not the only treasure. Sometimes, he said, you can give them a bit of information, you know, which I just really liked. I could sort of hear him saying it, you know. It's like, give them a bit of information, you know, maybe about themselves, you know, not just where the Citizens Advice Bureau is, but maybe tell them something about them. So do it kindly and with mercy. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
This is kind of following up on Stas' question, but I find it hard to balance what you say with what Christ says.
Really?
When he says, if someone asks for your tunic, give him your coat.
Yeah.
You know, Christ asks us to be like sheep, you know, to be unassuming,
Yeah.
regardless. And I don't know, it's hard to discern when to do that.
It is hard to discern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't
Yeah.
know. And kind of connected with that is with the idea of people who come up to you asking for things, for beggars or for homeless people.
There.
Because you meet homeless people, and sometimes when you listen to these people, it's just circumstances,
Yeah.
you know, and it's like sometimes you're aware that they're addicts. you
Yeah.
know, and sometimes you know that if you give them money or something,
Yeah.
you know, it won't be beneficial to them.
Yeah.
But it's like, personally, it's like, if I see someone who asks me,
Yeah.
and even though they are apparently, you know, not
Yeah.
in a good place, I just can't say no.
No, and you know what? I'm not saying don't give people whose lives are in disarray money. You know, I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying don't give things to people. I'm just saying try to think. Sometimes it's worth just waiting a moment, and if possible, getting to know them a bit, and then seeing what they actually need. But I'm not saying don't give people who are heroin addicts money. I'm not saying I give beggars money all the time. You know, I've been in a bad situation in my own life years ago, and people help me out without asking millions of questions. So yeah, I mean, help people out, but sometimes you literally might not be helping them. So I'm not making any kind of blanket proclamation about certain groups of people or people in certain situations, because you can meet people who don't need anything materially. They don't need anything, you know, and what they want is they kind of want you somehow. And that's what I'm really talking about. I'm talking about people who are trying to get from you a piece which they need to work at themselves, and you can't give them that peace. Yeah, I mean, give them, if you want to give them money, but don't. I think the distinction I'm making is don't try to give them, because they're in turmoil. You know, you can give them things, you can pray for them, you can invite them to church, you can do whatever you can do, but only Christ is going to give them that peace. So I think, you know, my answer to this gentleman was really, don't think you can be that whatever it is that they're just not doing and can do. So it wasn't really saying like, oh, homeless guy, just get a job. You know, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying think about what it is they're asking you for, and in those relationship situations. Because by that logic, if someone comes up to you and says, I'm just going to move into your house and abuse your children, then you just let them. You know, you can't take this kind of stuff like a textual. It's not a Haynes manual. You know, there's a hierarchy of kind of symbolism in it. You know. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. And probably no one wants to hear what I'm going to, say, because it's probably not interesting or that clever. But it was just also the other thing is being able to love from a distance, I think, as well.
Yeah.
That's a really powerful and difficult thing to learn. But I think that it's like so important in certain situations to just be able to love from a distance.
And the best love you can give from a distance is to you yourself to love Christ and to pray for that person. It's really good to, we hear about praying for our enemies, bless your enemies, praying for your enemies. Like, it sounds nice, but actually it really works. If you do it, I promise you, you do it for 2 weeks. If someone's really, if they've offended you or hurt you in some way, pray for them and do it for a fortnight and see what happens. I'm telling you, your life, it'll change your life. And, these things sit sometimes in our understanding of, scripture, and we hear them, we think, oh yes, no, I'll try not to swear about them when I'm talking to someone, but actually taking a couple of minutes every night to say, oh Lord, have mercy on those who hate me and those who wrong me, particularly, and may they not perish because of me, a sinner. Make that time to say that prayer for that person, that particular person, and try and call them to mind, and maybe feel some of the pain and some of the shame, and say those prayers. Do that for 2 weeks. If there's anyone who's got one of those going on now, give it a whirl, because I promise you it's incredibly powerful.
Any help for any more?
Yes.
Turn into a 10-4. How do you love people who have a lot of hatred in them, so either towards you or maybe have an obsession about something or someone, and they kind of constantly bring to mind this vitriolic thing? I'm quite a sensitive person, so when I see some kind of vitriol towards someone, I find it, I want to just retreat.
It's upsetting, isn't it?
Yeah. So how do you go about that?
How do you love those people? Yeah. How do you love horrible people? That's what yeah. I know God put all these horrible people in the world. Yeah. But I think in a way it's the same kind of practical spirituality. Like everything spiritual is practical when you boil it down. I mean, you can have a load of ideas about stuff, but how are you going to live? What do you do? And anything that's truly going to connect you to God, and through your connection with God, perhaps connect others to God. All of that is actual work we have to do. It's not ideas we hold or philosophical dispositions or kind of attitudes. So I would say in a situation like that, if you know someone, or you got someone, maybe you have to work with them, and every time they come in the office, they just start on this thing, and you're sitting there, and you can, maybe there's even a part of you that kind of feels a bit drawn in, and then you're having to fight that, and you resent that person because they're making you kind of join in the gossip, and then you catch yourself doing it and pull yourself away, and you just think, why? So again, for that, you need to pray for that person. God has kind of put them in front of you for a reason. They've brought you something, and we should pray for their deliverance. And I think for people who are really captured by a kind of spirit, a demon, of anger, they need praying for deliverance. And so we do that, and we just try to, I think practical. There's self-care around those people as well sometimes, because they can be quite psychologically not harmful. I don't want to say harmful, but it's tough. You can get injured being around those people, and spiritually it's challenging. So we need to look after ourselves and maybe just check our boundaries, and but pray for them. Really pray for them for their deliverance, and pray for anyone who's in their orbit that you know is struggling with them and suffering. And that might be all you can do. And I say that again. You know, I said earlier on, prayer is like the first thing we should do. And then later on, I said prayer. Maybe that's all you can do. You know, but you should definitely pray. You know, before anything else. And you know, I think. It's very easy I do this all the time. I think, oh, you know, I'm struggling with this situation or this person, so I start thinking, well, what can I do? And I start trying to plan out how to kind of fix the situation, forgetting, of course, that, you know, if I go in with that attitude, I'm just going to make a bigger mess of everything. So it's remembering to pray and asking God and asking for the prayers of the saints, asking Christ, asking for the prayers of the saints, to help me, open my eyes a bit, just give me something I can help this person with. What is it I can give them? Why are they in front of me? Why have you put them in front of me? Why have I got to work with them? What are you trying to tell me? You know, we should have that. I think that dialogue with Christ and to just say to him, Lord, I was minding my own business. Thought I was doing pretty well, and now look, you know, I've got this guy who makes me. I'm freaking out. Help me. And we should talk to Christ and ask for his. Ask him to help us, you know, because we're disciples of Christ, you know, and they would have gone up to him and said, Master, you know, what should we do about this annoying old woman who's, you know, shouting at you, or this guy up a tree? And we should talk to Christ like with respect, obviously, you know, but as his disciples did, you know, and ask him to help us. If we do that with childlike faith, he'll help us. I'm saying that like I've got it down, you know, but it's something we should strive to do, I think, and aspire to. Yeah.
Yes. So, how to love someone's person or the self when communication becomes really difficult because of the objective circumstances such as disease and everything?
Yeah. So I think the first thing there is to try to see people as they truly are, and not, as I was saying in my talk, you know, not as a collection of outcomes or you know, as I was saying, we define personhood really in terms of utility. That's how we look at personhood now, and that's why I think there's such a huge rise in this kind of assisted dying movement, because you think, you know, well, I'm not happy, I can't do the things I love, so where's my personhood? You know, and we haven't got an answer for that except to produce, you know, poisons to kill them with. So first and foremost, I think it's really important to remember this idea of communion. You know, the soul, through the nous, the way that the soul sees and understands, its purpose is communion. So with God and with other souls, you know. So being with people, and this is what I was saying. It's tough, you know, because there's nothing to say. How do you have a conversation? Sometimes it's awkward, you know, you sit there for a while, but if you can find some way to connect with that person, hold their hand, play a bit of music, talk to them, or even talk to other people that are there, but kind of try to include them a bit, just try to create a sense of communion on its most basic level, not, you know, the kind of, not holy communion, but just obviously, but communion between souls, you know, and see people as they truly are, bearing the image of God. We need to learn to see people as icons, if you like, of God, and the whole of creation as you know, as an icon of God, but people as icons, bearers of the image of God, and we do that by thinking about them in that way primarily, and then praying for them and making the time to be with them, and as our Christian journey unfolds, as we faithfully attend the liturgy, as we partake of and receive the sacraments, and we live in our communities like this, or in our parishes or communities or whatever that is, that this creates the context, if you like, for Christ to get to smash us to pieces and rebuild us as beings who can see in that way, who, when they look at people, they don't see what can I get from them, what can they do for me, or as a collection of, you know, problematic scenarios. They can't do anything, the things they love anymore, they can't do this, they can't do that, they can't speak, but as bearers of the image of God. And then if we can, the only people who've ever been able to do that are the saints. You know, the only people who can see other people as bearers of the image of God, really see, to see properly, that's actually really see. We can only see a bit. When we look at people, we literally only see them a bit. We see through a glass darkly. But the saints see properly. So that's what we should be aiming at. We should be aiming to become saints. Sorry, guys. We've set the bar a bit high. But we should, if we want to see people properly, we have to try and be saints. We have to do our bit, and which is to turn up really, and and engage in a practically structured and active Christian life with some zeal, and allow God to get to work in us. And it's obviously a lifetime's work, and most of us won't become saints. But that's what we should be striving for, because we want to be able to see properly.
Anyone else have any questions or things to ask from Mark?
I don't think I was going to get any, to be honest, Dave.
No. Mark?
Okay, thank you very much.
If not, thank you very much, Brother Mark.